Let me make sure the camera is actually still on. And the mic, is the mic still on? This is so I feel so clumsy trying to check to make sure everything's working. Okay, there we go. Hi everybody! So we're gonna be reading some Terra-verse biographies today. We're gonna be starting with some of my Queens of Muni. And then I hope to, at least once a week, read another biography by either me or by someone else. Because we still have lots of people to cover who would like to share their stories on the channel. But today we're going to be reading the first couple biographies by my line of Queens of Muni. So these are going to be the past queens. Hi, Luna Butterfly Queen. I'm doing well. I hope you all are doing well. I slept in a bit and had some other busy things to do today, so I had to rush to get here and forgot to have everything set up pre-stream. So that's silly. But I'm good. I'm good. Okay. Let's get into it. Maybe we'll give a couple more minutes if anyone wants to pop in, but I think we'll just go ahead and start explaining the things we'll be reading today. So my EU is, it's not finished, but it's also a little complex and there's lots to it. So if you wanted to like get into the nitty-gritty details, you can always go over to my DeviantArt. The link should be in the description and check out things. But I really, really want to be able to cover a lot of it here on stream. So I maybe will be going over the hit list mysteries and the What We Do in the Shadows, which is a series that I'm doing, and I really want to try to cover a lot of it. Okay. Flipping over to C and B. So move me down here. As you can see, there's Muni in the background there. Make sure the mic is still turned on. Okay, we are set. So, this is the past history of the Queens of Muni in my universe. I don't have all the biographies written, but we are going to be going over the first 2 queens, I think, today, if we manage to fill the time. So, the Providentia of the Butterfly Sovereignty. Welcome to Providence. To my dearest Hope Butterfly, her descendants, and all people of Muni, I offer you the most earnest gift I can, a retelling of your ancestors and their lives before you, so you may learn of and from them. The stories you are about to hear are provided to you by the small documents of history that remain, the writings of the keepers, and what I have observed myself. Know that despite our knowledge, we are not all-knowing. Minor details have been lost from some stories. Other stories deserve their privacy, and that there is more to be uncovered. I hope that while I cannot provide you with all the answers, that what I can be honest and insightful. Let us come together to appreciate all that has led us to the era of IDL. Welcome to Providence. Signed, the Sideways N. Oops, I forgot to change the side. Thank you for popping that in chat. There it is. There's the book. Sorry, guys. I have a lot of buttons to push, and I forgot to push the button. Don't worry, you were only supposed to see this book. We should be good from here on out. So, that is the first introduction. And now I'm going to read a couple things, because Mo, the first settler, does not have a biography. But we are going to read a little about her. So I will go to the next slide. Ancestors of Muni, number 1, Mo Croft. Coming across new waters, Mo the founder took the reign. Leading the people safely through harsh winters, she made herself a name. Born? Unknown. Died? 37 BM. Married to? Unknown. Children? Beatrice Croft. Female. And that is the little information you know of my version of Mo for this so far. Going to our next person. Ancestors of Muni number 2, Beatrice Croft. Beatrice, the mother of queens. Through the struggle of the first generation, one daughter did survive, her legacy the Muni calendar, from which the stars she did derive. Born 2 BM, died 37 BM, married to Jacob Leithman. Children, Alvina Croft, Rosas Croft, Ivor Croft, and Neo Croft. And if you cannot tell, she is kind of inspired by Beatrice from Over the Garden Wall. And very, what is Regency era kind of fashion. That's what I wanted to do with her story. So we will learn more about her in this biography we are now about to read. Moving on to my first queen. Pulling it up. Astrop Butterfly. Now, reader, I'm sure I know what many of you are thinking. Who is this? But what about Mo? Well, bear with me, for we will get to her, but in due time. For now you must sit, wait, and listen as we dive into the history of the first Queen of Butterfly, who you may be shocked to learn was not in fact Mo, like some of you have been taught, but her granddaughter. Regularly, I would tell the story from start to finish, But this story has a couple of twists and turns, so we shall start from here and return to the beginning at a later time. So without further ado, let me introduce Astrop, the first butterfly. When the monsters came to make their selfish claims against the Muni people, one girl said she would not oblige. Fighting battles with the gift given upon her came Astrop, the first of the butterflies. Alvina Blythe Croft would be born Splenix 4th of 23 BM, before independence, to her mother Beatrice Croft and her father Sir Jacob Leithman. She had her mother's russet hair and her father's brown eyes. Upon her birth, her mother would cheer for the first surviving heir to the third generation of the Croft name, and her grandmother Mo would clap along. Through her early years, Alvina would learn of their people's culture and legacy. She was told stories of her grandmother Mo and the first settlers, washing up upon the shore of their continent that they would call Muni, with no memory from where they had come. All that was sure was that there were boats full of them and supplies, and they were in need of a home. Alvina would ask her grandmother, "How did you know what your names were if you had no memory?" To which her grandmother would tell her that she had a dream of a small blue man that gave her a name and a prophecy of a harsh storm, and when she and the others awoke, the storm was upon them. When it began to harshly storm, her grandmother was the first to step up and lead the people to safety around a giant stump, and instructed them each to hold hands and pray as they tried to outlive the storm. Although several would be lost to the cold, including Mo's first child, many would survive, and it was a miracle that they did. When they came out alive, they named Mo their leader, and it was at this point that the names entered into the brains of five of the settlers, who would carve their names into the stump and be named the first noblemen. Then together, out of the wood of the stump, they would begin to build the rest of their lives. When asked where their last names came from, Mo told her granddaughter that it was from a book within her satchel that seemed to be a diary of her from before the people all lost their memories. At the beginning was the name R. Croft was written, and so she knew it must have been something like her name. The book didn't provide much else, just entries about how the storm at sea was wild and that people were worried for their lives and feared that they would never hit land. Alvina often bundled up under her covers as her grandmother told her these tales. She loved all of them, but was always questioning whenever her grandmother spoke up about the little blue man that gave her name. Alvina would grow to assume it was made up, a childish spin to a tragic tale that her grandmother told her to make her laugh. At the age of 10, her grandmother would give her her journal, telling her she knew how much she loved the thing from the stories, so she deserved to hold it in her own hands, as well as the entries from before the settlers hit shore. Were the diary entries from afterwards of Mo trying to learn how to lead their people. Mo told her granddaughter that she also thought it might help guide Alvina when it eventually came time for her to lead their people. As Alvina aged, she would learn to farm with her mother, father, 3 brothers, and her people. It was a small town, and people were often laid to rest after catching some sickness, so there was not much to do. As well as farming, the girl liked to explore their lands and watch the stars with her mother at night. It was her mother Beatrice Croft who made the original Muni calendar. In her years as a young lady, she would try to study the stars and see how long a year would last, but she got lots of varying information, and so the calendar was a bit of a failure. The mother and daughter would laugh about it nonetheless. Through most of her childhood, Alvina was kept within the walls of their small town. And so it wasn't until she was 12 in 35 BM that Alvina would learn of the existence of monsters. She learned of such when her mother told her she was of age, and so would follow with them to the town council meetings, where there she saw a large batcorn monster and screamed, describing it as something out of her nightmares. Her parents would quickly hush the girl, apologizing to the monster, the current king Batwing of the monster people, who was there to collect the village's corn tax. Alvina would wrinkle her nose as she watched the encounter and debate. Her parents and people seemed to be afraid of this man. He was demanding corn from them, and for what? Just so they could live there? They shouldn't need to pay some monster to keep their home. Alvina would continue to attend these diplomatic meetings with her parents, and each time she would feel more and more reluctant to hand over the corn. It took time to grow, and the people greatly needed food. This monster king had no right to take it from them. Sadly, in 37 BM, her grandmother Mo would pass, and she would be buried in the Great Croft Cemetery. Her mother was in too much pain to attend that week's meetings, and so her father wished to stay by her mother's side, so the now 14-year-old Alvina would be set to do it on her own. But when faced with the King Batwing and ordered to hand over the corn, Alvina said no. The king gasped and asked her why, and she went on to say, "Why is it that we poor people would have to pay you corn to live where we call home? Why don't you go grow your own corn, you freak face?" Little did the girl know that by disrespecting the king's name and not handing over their corn, she had just broken a peace treaty created by her grandmother and the monsters years ago. That night, the town would be ambushed. Dozens of varying monsters would raid the town and start to set it ablaze. The townspeople tried to stop them, and soon resulted in trying to fight with the monsters off. But it was of no use. Alvina would watch with her youngest brother in her arms as her father was stabbed by a monster soldier. She screamed and ran with her brother and other kids as they all ran outside their village walls, looking for places to hide. Alvina, while trying to take responsibility and direct them, would then see a monster following her tail, so she would lead him astray from the rest of the group. She ran and would later one day write that, "I truly feared I would die that day." Once she thought she was far enough away, she hid in the tree and watched as the monsters continued running trying to catch her, but he had now lost her trace. Alvina then snuck up behind the monster quietly and smacked him with a rock in the back of the head, but it was unfortunately not enough to knock him out. It only got him disjointed for a moment, and then he was red-hot angry on her tail once again. She ran until she came to a water source and had nowhere else to run. The monster was approaching her and she cried tears, believing this to be her end. She would back up more and more into the water as she cried. She prayed to whatever gods or goddesses were out there that her people would live on and be okay, that maybe the world would be so generous as to let her live. "Please, please," she prayed, "let us live and not be killed by these wicked monsters, and if I'm meant to meet my fate, let me do it in bravery and not in tears." As she heard the monster get closer, the girl was late to realize the water started to swirl and spin around her, changing into a bright light gold. But while hearing the screams and seeing fires within the sky, the girl would then notice something within the water that glowed. She reached out to it and felt her hands come around something, and as she pulled it back from within the water, it glowed and morphed within her hands, until it formed into what seemed like a staff with a heart on it with wings. Alvina did not know what this was, but she considered it enough to be a weapon, and hopefully some sign from the gods. She suddenly felt a wave of confidence overcome her, and so rose from the water with the staff in her hands and ready to face her foe. When the monster came up at her, holding a knife in his hands, Alvina aimed her staff like a weapon at the monster, and readied herself to fight. She ran at him and hit him, not expecting to see him fly back, as if she suddenly had a wave of extra strength. The monster looked at her in shock, and started to run back towards her. Seeing her foe approaching, and for nowhere for her to go, she screamed into the sky asking for one more blessing, and suddenly out of her staff came a blast of light, hitting the monster and rendering him unconscious. Alvina stared in shock at what she had done, and then looked at the staff she was holding, noticing the red-hot glowing crystal heart from within. She felt hot herself, and when she touched her face, she realized she was burning. She decided to pay it no mind, though. The gods had given her her requested gift, and now she had to use it. The girl would then look around her surroundings, trying to find a trace of where she was. But she could not. The only clue she saw was the smoke building in the night sky. Alvina tried to follow the light of the fire, and soon would stumble upon the remains of her town. She still wasn't sure what this staff thing was, but she prayed upon it to lend her more power and strength, and with another scream, she started a thunderous storm that started to put out all the fire. With her scream, all the monsters looked to her in shock and surprise. Who was this girl, and what was she doing? As they then started to approach and run towards her, she would blast them each in single blows. Soon the monsters would start to retreat, not knowing what forces this girl had found and held, but not wanting to see more of it. And as the last of the monsters vanished, Alvina would yell for them to never return, or they would face her wrath. The next hours were spent scourging the village, looking for survivors and things that could be saved. Thankfully, due to the storm, not much of their wood had truly burned to ruin. When a group including her brothers and the other children returned, Alvina ran to them and hugged them, happy to see that they were safe. Her youngest brother would stare inquisitively at her, though, to which she would ask what was wrong. He would then tell her that she had funny little butterfly things on her cheeks. Alvina would gasp and take a mirror that was offered to her and see that her younger brother was right. She now had little green butterflies upon her cheeks. It was then that she also noticed that her eyes had now turned green. Alvina didn't know what to make of any of this, but she decided the best thing to do would be to express thanks. Her thoughts and prayers would then be interrupted when one man called upon her that they had found her mother injured. Alvina would run and follow after them to where they had her mother, laid out in pain and hurt. Alvina would cry when she saw the fatal wound and blood pouring out of her mother's side. Knowing that there was no way to save her, she kneeled to spend the last time she had together with her mother. "My daughter," her mother said, "look at how strong and brave you were. You stood up for our people, and though the outcome may have been disaster, do not blame yourself, for what you have really done is help us to realize that we should be free. You have opened our minds, been blessed, and now you will be a great leader, will you not?" Alvina sobbed into her mother's side and nodded, promising to do her best at taking on her family's role. Her brothers all then soon followed, and soon they all gathered around their mother as she took her dying breath. That night, after temporary construction of huts and homes for the time being was made, the remaining village would have a meeting. They were all amazed when Alvina stood up before all of them, claiming to be the heir of the Crofts, and promising to do her best to lead them to this new timeline. She expected her title to simply be one of leader, perhaps town mayor, like her mother was, but the people said no while bowing before her, saying she was to be their queen. Alvina stared at her people in shock, thinking this at first to be a joke. But when she saw that they were not joking, she teared and accepted her title and role. The next days were spent rebuilding the village and healing those they could. Unfortunately, her oldest brother as well as many of the adults ended up dying from the disease or wounds. During this time, Alvina would also study the staff-like object that had been bestowed upon her by the stars, as well as practice the supposed magic that it had given her. It was 1 week after the raid from the monsters, after the village had been mostly fixed, that Alvina would be officially crowned. The crown they bestowed upon her would be forged from the slickest gold and the most glimmering peridot. It was here before her people that she announced that she decided to take on a new name, Astrop, meaning she who was chosen by the stars. And although it felt wrong to abandon it, Astrop would also give up her last name and take on the last name Butterfly for the symbols on her cheeks. She proclaimed that Croft was the era of my mother and my grandmother before her, but now we are entering into a new era, and I wish to keep their legacies to their name while forging a new one for my own. Then, last but not least, Astrop made her oath to always protect them, and that she would do whatever she could to truly one day free them from the cruel monster hands. The ceremony was almost over when some of the town heard footsteps approaching their gates. Into their town came none other than King Batwing, with a worried frown upon his face. Astrop readied herself for a fight. Before the man could get a word out, Astrop yelled at him, demanding that he leave their village, and that he had no claim on them anymore. Batwing tried one last time to speak, but seeing the monster not leaving, Astrop raised her staff and blasted near him, telling him if he did not leave them, there would be war. To this his eyes widened, and he reluctantly left their town. Little did the people know that King Batwing had come to their village hoping to apologize, for he did not send the raid against their village, and had come in hope to establish a new form of peace after hearing word of the new queen's power. The people then praised their newly crowned queen for standing up to the monster that had held them down for so long. Astrop exhaled, smiling and overwhelmed by the thanks and praise she was receiving. She hoped that being their queen would not be too hard of a task, and if it was as easy as that just was, then she held hope that things would truly get better. After the ceremony, Astrop would pull out her grandmother's old journal and begin to write her own entries, starting with, "Today I was crowned queen." As the years would pass, the queen would continue to write in this journal and document her reign, as well as all she learned of the magical staff and gifts given to her. This book would become the future book of spells. In the coming years, their village would continue to flourish. No longer did they worry about having corn prepared on time or children going to bed hungry. They may have been a small people, but they would continue to grow. The queen would return to where she found the staff, and then finally noticed the water to be the color of gold. She wasn't sure what this substance was, but she knew it was responsible for their blessing, so she would tell her people to begin to build a sanctuary around it. There would be several more encounters with the monster people, but whenever they got close, Astrop simply raised her staff and they would be gone. With the queen's image, she would be able to bestow upon her people both strength and confidence. As the town grew, the queen worked hard to help and provide for her people, along with her ministers. It was when the queen was 17 that she began to fancy one of her only senior ministers, Ferdinand Novish, who was in charge of preparing the people for if they ever needed to go to war. Although she had developed feelings for the man, she would not speak of them until she was at the age 19, where she confronted and confessed, asking if he would please make her the happiest queen and become her king. With a smile upon his face, Ferdinand held the queen's face in his palm, and then leant down and kissed her, saying he would be honored. And so in 42 BM, Queen Astrop Butterfly and Prince Consort Ferdinand would be wed. They had about as large a celebration as they could manage, which was to say, rather small. Upon their wedding night, Astrop would conceive their daughter, who would be born 9 months later. So in 43 BM, the first butterfly princess would be born. Astrop stared down at her daughter in awe, as the princess was born with eyes and hair that looked to be made of gold, much like the water-like substance in the sanctuary, and 2 golden apples on her cheeks. The queen would name her Eda, meaning industrious and prosperous, for the hope she held for their growing kingdom. Upon the birth of her daughter, Astrop would name their kingdom a matriarchy, meaning it would be ruled by the firstborn daughter. She did this as an attempt to follow in the footsteps of her grandmother and mother, who passed the power onto her. Eda would be raised within the walls, much like Astrop was, except as the years passed, the people of Muni would improve upon their small town and begin to build a castle. By the time the princess was 7, the royal family would move into it while continuing to expand their kingdom. But when Eda was 9 years old, she would sneak out of some of her private lessons and go beyond the walls that had always amazed her. Once Queen Astrop noticed and heard word that her daughter was missing, she started searching the whole town, and soon outside the town after that. She was terrified of losing her daughter and became more scared when she saw a group of barracorns near the town. She ambushed the barracorns, who had confessed on having seen the princess, and they asked the queen to please not hurt them. Astrop gave them a warning to stay away from the town, and then went on in the direction they had directed. Queen Astrop came calling out to her daughter, scared the monsters had hurt her. When the queen saw the princess with the horse-headed monster, she aimed her wand, to which the monster cowered. Though Eda jumped in the way and told her mom not to shoot, for they were her friend. The queen wanted to hear no such thing, though. A monster was a monster, and so she dragged her daughter away and swore at the horse monster to stay away from them. Once back at the village, Eda would be instructed that she should not trust any type of monster, even a young one that looked like it might not cause harm. Eda wasn't sure, but nodded her head at her mother's demand. Princess Eda would try sneaking out more and more on many occasions, but the queen from then on kept her under better eye. Apparently the king of the Ponyheads would hear word of Astrop threatening his daughter, so in 52 BM, the Ponyheads would declare they were now the enemies of the butterflies. Astrop held no fear, though, for she knew that she would be a strong queen. There would be a few battles between the families, but not much ever took place. What the Ponyheads really did, though, was lessen the rain the humans needed to plant their crops, leaving them in a slight famine. Astrop would try to recreate the raining spell she did all those years ago, but she could not. In 57 BM, Astrop would hand the magic staff down to her daughter, the same age she was when she first found the item, starting the tradition of the heir receiving their wand at their 14th birthday. When Eda took the staff, it turned into a smaller staff with a big red apple jewel at the end, and a green spiral going up the golden handle. From here on out, the staff would be referred to as Magic Wand, after the Princess Eda called it so. In her years with the wand, despite her studies, Astrop had only ever learned how to use defensive and aggressive magic, so wasn't able to help offer much to her daughter when trying to learn. Astrop told her daughter she often channeled her anger or fear to cast a spell, but Eda explained that they didn't have to do any of those things. Astrop would be stuck on how to help and guide her daughter. It would soon be after that, though, that Astrop would find her daughter kissing the small stepped-on flowers, and before her eyes they would begin to grow and heal. When she asked her daughter how she did it, Eda explained that she felt very bad for the poor things, and so channeled her love and grief. This wasn't the only magic Eda seemed to do. She would also very often turn things to gold. The princess apparently found it much easier to do magic than her own mother, and Ferdinand would often joke that it was because she was born and made from it. With her magic, Eda would create the rain the people needed, and their crops would flourish once more. Unfortunately, this only angered the ponyheads more, who then shot down from the skies beams of magic at the people, only Eda holding the power to protect them from such blasts. Eda tried, but she was not able to shield them all, and many, including her father, were hit and injured. Once the ponyhead raid was done, the king came down and said that if they ever messed with the elements that belonged to the ponyheads again, he would wage war. Astrop was scared, not realizing how powerful the ponyhead monsters truly were, and how she now had no power to protect her people with. To make matters worse, Ferdinand would die out of the magical radiation wound, and Astrop would cry out in guilt for having not been able to protect him and for having survived, entering into a depression. After the raid, rain would become even more sparse, leaving them with less food to spare and share. The queen would often put off eating, favoring her daughter and subjects to get their fill. The issue would last a few more weeks until Princess Eda was able to master the magic of making food from thin air. Despite there now being more food, the queen would still prefer not to eat, for her stomach had shrunken and she was often not able to hold her filling. Astrop would then try to teach her daughter offensive magic, but the princess struggled holding her form. Despite her errors and issues, though, she did not give up or into despair. The queen worried for her people, but she knew her daughter was going to be a great heir, and even if she couldn't fight physically, she would help bring them to peace in other ways. Astrop the first butterfly would be found dead in 61 BM at the age of 38, having died from both lack of food and disease. She would be the first to be buried in the butterfly graveyard, until later her body would be moved to the butterfly crypts by the future queen, Astraea. Besides her bed, Astrop would leave her notebook to Eda, and the soon-to-be queen would pick it up and start her own entries, starting with, "Today my mother died, and I shall soon be queen." Astrop would be remembered as the first and one of the most important queens, for she was the one to free them from the monster's shackles, and gifted upon them the magic of the wand. And that was the biography of Queen of Muni number 1, Astrop Butterfly. Yay! Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Yee. And now for some fun facts about her and her creation. Astrop is the queen depicted in the Independence Day book. In my interpretation, the Independence Wars lasted many years and for multiple queens. We only see the beginning of the book, but Star skips quite a bit of it when she says, "And then there was fighting, 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 and the Mumins won." The Independence Wars didn't officially start during Astrop's reign, but due to being the first queen and the actions she made, she counted technically as the start. Astrop's original name was Alvina, which means a friend to all, and her last name was Croft, which I'll get into when we get to Mo. But she changed both her first and last name when she became queen. Astrop became queen at 14. It also isn't written about much in her bio, but Astrop was quite religious, despite there not being a strong religion in Muni at the time. Astrop always believed there was some god or goddess watching over and guiding them. And now to Astrop's daughter, Eda. Sorry, give me a minute to open it. Okay, Queens of Muni number 2, Eda Butterfly. Eda, the peacemaker. When in famine and dying, the first princess would make peace. With the help of the Ponyhead Kingdom, she'd help feed her people and help stop disease. The first princess of Muni, Eda Butterfly, would be born Thurk 68th, 43 BM, to her mother Queen Astrop and her father Prince Consort Ferdinand. She was born with golden illuminating hair and eyes, and golden apples on her cheeks. Her mother named her Eda, meaning industrious and prosperous. Upon her birth, her mother would officially name their kingdom a matriarchy, solidifying her as the future heir. Eda would be raised within the walls of their kingdom, never seeing the outside, but always being curious of it. When she was 7 years old, the family would move into their newly built castle, and upon going up the tower, Eda was able to see the beautiful sea and forest outside. Her eyes turned to the stars as she studied it all, and she made it her mission to one day go outside of it. When the princess was 8 and 51 PM, her mother and father would arrange for her to start on her basic lessons to read and write, which the princess always found to be quite boring. It was only the fact that they would read fairy tales that kept the young girl reading. Stories of princesses like her, and oh how she wanted to meet one. So in 52 BM, Eda would sneak out of her Munian language lesson while her teacher was distracted reading, and she would finally make her way out of the castle and to the walls. Once she came upon them, she touched them and finally felt a bit of fear. This was one of her dreams, and it was actually happening. With a deep breath of confidence, the princess made her way outside. Once she was out, she marveled at the mangrove trees and the other plants she saw outside. Her home was beautiful, believe her, but nothing is like the wild and raw of nature. While exploring outside the walls, Eda would stumble upon a flying unicorn head creature being cornered by a group of barracorns. Eda saw how the pony head looked to be scared, and so she ran forward and threw a rock at one of the barracorns, who turned to her looking ready to attack, until they saw the marks on her cheeks. Now scared, the barracorns then all began to run away. Eda would approach the pony head creature and ask if they were okay. The pony head nodded to her, also looking at her quite scared, so Eda decided to offer them an apple that she was saving for lunch. "Hi, my name is Eda. What's yours?" she said, and she offered the apple. The ponyhead smiled at the offering and answered, "Princess Lucia Ponyhead." Eda lit up at the mention of a princess, for she had finally met another. She wasn't alone. She was so excited that she jumped up and down, and the two girls would continue to talk until Queen Astrop came calling out for her daughter, scared the monsters had gotten to her. When the queen saw the princess with the horse-headed monster, she aimed her staff, to which Lucia cowered, though Eda jumped in between them and told her mom not to blast, for they were her new friend. The queen wanted to hear no such thing, though. A monster was a monster, and so Astrop dragged her daughter away and swore at the horse monster to stay far away from them. Once back at the village, Eda would be instructed that she was not to sneak off again, not leaving the castle and village. It was dangerous, and most importantly, she was not to trust any kind of monster, even a young one that was a ponyhead, or one that looked like it could not cause any harm. Eda wasn't sure, but nodded her head at her mother's demand. Princess Eda would try sneaking off more, but the queen from then on kept her under better eye. Apparently the king of the ponyheads would hear word of Astrop threatening his daughter, so in 52 BM, the ponyheads would declare they were now the enemies of the butterflies. Queen Astrop held no fear though, and Eda didn't either. She knew that her mom was a strong queen. And as mentioned in the previous entry, there would be many battles between the families, but not much ever took place. What the ponyheads really did, though, was lessen the rain of the humans needed to plant their crops, leaving them in a slight famine. Her mother Astrop would try to recreate the raining spell she did all those years ago, but she could not. And despite there then being a growing food shortage, the queen made sure her daughter would never hunger, often offering her some of her own food. In 57 BM, at the age of 14, Eda would receive her mother's magical staff, as her mother did when she was her age. They were not expecting it to change, and so the whole crowd gasped when it started to morph and change. Eda felt its power spiral through her, like a spark that was lit aflame. The staff then turned into a straight golden wand with a green swirl and a red apple gem at the point. The staff was shorter now, and so the princess said it was more of a wand, and it soon would be officially named as such. Eda had not yet seen much of her mother using magic, as she had often sheltered from such, so she did not know quite what to do once she received the wand. She asked herself, what would mother do? But she couldn't think of much. All that she knew was the wand was used to fight monsters, but that she didn't want to do any of that. Her mother would still attempt to teach her some basic magic based on her experiences with the wand. She mentioned channeling things like fear and rage, but Eda had neither of those, so she wondered what she could channel. Eda would soon find her spark, though, when later that year she saw a flower bed that had been stomped on. She knelt down and kissed the flowers, and magically they rose and came back to life. Eda was amazed at what she had done, and soon went around kissing all the plants she could to find and see what would happen. When her mother questioned her, she said, I felt very bad for the poor things, and so channeled my love and grief to help them grow. With this magic, Eda would help combat the famine her people faced due to the pony heads. Eda would then later create the first spell purposely. She was picking apples with her father when he jokingly brought up how her love of apples was destined by her cheeks, and that the prophecy would only truly be real if they were made of gold. This gave Eda the idea, and so with some practice she managed to make a gold transformation spell, transforming the apple into gold and presenting it to her father. In 59 BM, after almost 2 years of using magic to make the crops regrow, and now some months since it had rained, Eda would cast a storm summoning spell to rain down upon their crops. Her mother Astrop congratulated and praised her daughter for being so talented, and the people thought all was well and good. That was until King Ponyhead came storming down, with a raid of laser-shooting ponyheads shooting down at the humans. Eda tried to make a shield spell, but she wasn't strong enough to guard them all, and unfortunately her father Ferdinand, among others, would be shot. Once the ponyhead raids were done, the king came down and said if they ever messed with the elements that belonged to the ponyheads again, he would wage war. Eda didn't understand. All she had done was make it rain. The rain did not belong to these ponyheads, so why did he threaten war? She could tell how scared her mother was, and it only worsened when her father was confirmed dead. For the first time in her life, Eda felt anger and fear, as well as great sadness. But for her mother's sake, she tried to remain calm. After the raid, rain would become even more sparse, leaving them with less food to spare and share. The queen would often put off eating, favoring her daughter and subjects to get their fill. The issue would last a few more weeks until Princess Eda was able to master the magic of making food from thin air. Despite there now being more food, the queen would still prefer to not eat, for her stomach had shrunken and she was often not able to hold her filling. Astrop would try to teach her daughter offensive magic, but the princess struggled holding her form. But despite her errors and issues, she did not give up in despair. She wanted to prove her mother that she could be strong. Astrop was worried for her people, but she knew her daughter was going to be a great heir, and even if she couldn't fight physically, she would help bring them to peace in other ways. Eda was out one day walking in the streets, looking for nature to fix or anyone in need, when she saw a lone dying sunflower, and so as the princess had the habit to do, she kissed it and it came back to life. Eda smiled upon her work when she heard someone laughing behind her, and it was revealed to be some boy. When he realized it was the princess, he apologized and thanked her for saving his plant, for he was sure it would have died without her help. Eda told him it was no problem at all, and that she'd never like to see anything, even a plant, die. She then asked the boy what his name was, to which he looked shocked but told her it was Jackie Growth. Eda smiled upon Jackie and then asked if they could be friends. The two would then get to know each other and grow closer, and Jackie brought Eda to his family's dying flower shop, where she brought all the flowers back to life and quickly helped them pick back up the business. The two laughed together, and Jackie often made fun of her for making out with the plants. As the two would bond, Eda would slowly start to develop feelings for Jackie. She loved how he also cared so deeply about nature and had a wonderful amount of knowledge about the plants. At first she wasn't sure what it was, thinking maybe she was sick or cursed, but when she asked her mother what this feeling was, and that they were like butterflies in her stomach, Her mother simply laughed and asked if she had a crush, to which she would make Eda freeze. In 61 BM, Eda would walk into her mother's chambers and find her laying dead. She cried by her mother's side, as word was quickly spread about the death. The doctors told her the reason for death, and Eda simply wept, wishing that she had just forced her mother to have eaten more. Besides her mother's body was the journal she would always write in. Eda read it, and was amazed and comforted by the things she found written, such as her mother's true insecurity of raising a child, and the spell ideas her mother had written down. From that moment, Eda decided this would be a butterfly tradition, to write in this book and pass it down, and so with it now being her turn to reign, she dipped her quill and wrote, "Today my mother died, and I shall soon be queen." Upon her mother's death, Eda would construct a new area of the cemetery just for the butterfly bloods. She had her father's body moved there, and then buried her mother, simply wishing she could have lived longer to see her grow. Eda would be coronated queen the following month, at 18 years old. The people asked if she would take on a new name like her mother, where she said no, she would reign honorably with the one she was given. The work as queen was much harder than Eda had initially suspected it to be, and she often tired herself out. She stayed up hours some nights trying to perfect her magic, and eventually being able to do some of her mother's spells. She tried to lay some of her work on her ministers, but it was still so much for her to do. It didn't help when in the following winter, many of her people would fall ill. Dying to the winter was not uncommon, but many people remained sick after the winter passed, and a sickness was quickly spreading and slowly killing their people off. Eda wasn't sure what to do. She confided in Jackie most about how hard everything was on her. Losing her mother, the ponyhead threats, the famine, the sickness and death, all of it. Jackie would comfort her and promise to try to help however he could. They started with one problem at a time. Jackie took some of the work off of the queen's shoulders so she would get a proper rest. And with more rest, she had more energy to help make food with her magic to combat the famine. After that, Jackie and Eda would look more into the sickness that was spreading. With some of Jackie's knowledge on plants and Eda's magic, they would be able to make an herb to help combat the sickness. It didn't outright cure it, but they had made progress. By this point, 1 year had passed, and on the Queen's birthday, she would thank Jackie for all the help he was able to provide, and that she was truly thankful to have him by her side. Jackie took her hand and told her he would always be there to help her. She was his son, and he was a small sunflower. Although he didn't have much, he would always be pointing towards her. Eda smiled and cried happily. Then, to the Queen's surprise, Jackie knelt down on one knee and asked if he would please have the honor of marrying his precious son, and to help officially carry her burdens. Eda couldn't believe it. She heated up and tried to hide her face so he wouldn't see her turning red, and the tears continued to fall. He stood back up and gently pushed her hands out of her face, continuing to smile at her. He awkwardly confessed to having a crush on her from the very first day he saw her kissing the plants. He then laughed, saying that he was kind of jealous of them. Once again, he reiterated that he loved her, and would she please marry him. This time, Eda was able to look at him, but she still had no words. She simply nodded to him as he embraced her. The two would be married 1 month later in 64 BM. It would be a small gathering of mostly Jackie's family and some ministers. They would hold it in the cemetery, just so Eda would be close to her parents as she was wed. She simply wished she had some living family to see her and walk her down the aisle. Eda would then give birth to her first child in 63 BM, but the child would unfortunately not survive long past birth. The queen wept, hugging the lifeless babe, as her husband comforted her. They would name the child Michael and have him buried in the butterfly cemetery. After a while of grieving their son, the queen and prince consort would try again, and so late 63 BM, they would give birth to a little girl with pink candies on her cheeks, and they would name her Memory, meaning sweet. She would have her father's hair and her mother's eyes. With the birth of her daughter, Eda would feel more at ease of having an heir, but she would still often weep for her firstborn son. It had been about 1.5 years without rain in 64 BM, and the queen was growing tired of having to water their crops by hand, and fearful that they might one day run out of water, not to mention that all the plants outside the village were dying, and she couldn't save them all. She knew she could make it rain herself, but she didn't want to anger the ponyheads like they did all those years ago. The queen spoke to her husband about it. him asking if they would need to get ready for war, but she said no. She would not have war hit her kingdom. So despite her husband's fears, Eda made a plan to have a word with the Ponyheads. Eda didn't actually know how to summon or make word to the King Ponyhead, so she simply went a distance from the village and used a spell to start making it rain. In an instant, a Ponyhead appeared, looking at her in anger, but upon seeing their face turned to one of shock. "It's you," they said, which made the queen question, and she asked them what they meant. The Ponyheads said they were sent to kill whoever was disrespecting the Ponyheads by making it rain, but that they did not want to kill her. The queen asked them why, and they smiled, grabbing on an apple preserved in a bubble, and suddenly Eda's eyes went wide. "It's you," she said, now recognizing the Ponyhead as the one she had met all those years ago, the Princess Lucia. Eda smiled and told the Princess Ponyhead that she didn't want to disrespect them, but they needed to have a chat. The land was dying without rain, and the queen was hoping they could come to an agreement and put the grudge behind them. The Princess Ponyhead looked unsure, but agreed. A few minutes later, the King Ponyhead returned with his daughter, an angry frown upon his face. He asked Eda what it was she wanted, and she explained their peace. "You refuse to make it rain, and without water, all the plants and food are dying. If you continue on like this, then there will be nothing left. Please, what can we offer you or do for you to allow it to rain naturally again? How can we make peace?" The King Ponyhead said there was nothing they could offer that he would want, for they were but poor, weak creatures, unlike the Ponyheads. He said that what he wanted was for the old queen to apologize for scaring his daughter all those years ago. Eda felt hurt for what he had called her mother, when he called her a mean name, and sad with the reminder, but she told him it wasn't possible, that her mother was now dead, and so she could not apologize. He then looked at her sadly, before returning to a neutral face, saying there was nothing they could do then, and to prepare for an attack. Eda was scared. She had felt so sure that she could get through to these creatures. They needed it to rain, and they couldn't be attacked again. Before he floated away, she quickly begged him to please not hurt her people for a choice she made, that it was on no one but her. The king continued floating away, but before he was gone, Princess Ponyhead yelled for him to stop. She announced that as the next heir, she didn't want to have a war with these people for something as simple and petty as making it rain, but there was no reason for them to be enemies. The last queen wanted nothing to do with their kind, and now this one is asking for peace. So why not take it? That she didn't care anymore about when the last queen threatened her, that her father was being a coward and a fool. The king looked angered, but with a groan he agreed not to hurt the people, and fine, they would return the weather to its natural cycle, and that they could discuss peace between their people soon. That is, if his heirs wish. That if it was his heir's wish, then it would be done. It rained for the first time in a year and a half after that, and all the people celebrated in the streets and praised their queen for convincing the beasts. And to this Eda told her people that the Ponyheads were not beasts, but going to be their allies and their friends, and her people must not disrespect them. A week later, the Ponyheads and the Butterflies would have their official peace treaty meeting, where it was revealed that the King Ponyhead was actually impressed by his daughter's show of strength, and so gave all the power to her in this decision. Peace between the species was made, and then Eda told the Ponyheads that it might take her people time, but they would come to accept them. Then last of all, she offered them an offering of a platter of golden apples, as thanks to their understanding and accepting of their peace. After learning that the queen could turn anything into gold, the King Ponyhead was impressed. He did not know she held this power, and he gave her an offer. She could make it rain or anything she desired whenever she saw fit, if she would offer them a donation of gold and riches as payment, once a year. The queen accepted, and the peace treaty was made. After that, the landscape seemed to heal, and the queen now had less duties or things to worry about. She was able to relax, and in 65 BM, Eda would give birth to a third child, a daughter she named Titania. She had blonde hair like her father, blue eyes, and golden arrows on her cheeks. The queen would then spend the next 2 years in relative peace, raising her daughters with her husband, and then in 67 BM, she'd give birth to her final child, a son with orange flames on his cheeks that they named Juniper. After the birth of her newest son, Her oldest daughter was very excited to have a new addition, and loved to hold and coo at her brothers and sister. With the birth of their fourth child and second son, the Queen and Prince Consort decided that they would put a pause or end to having children, and that they had their hands full for now. The years were peaceful and serene, playing and raising their children, until unfortunately in 68 BM, Momori would fall ill to the sickness, catching one of the worst cases. Despite how hard her mother and father tried to cure her, she would unfortunately die. Momori would be buried in the Butterfly Cemetery the following day. She died at the age of 7. The Queen would become much sadder after this. With the horrible luck of losing her family members, she held on to the ones she still had tightly. When her daughter Titania said she wanted to learn to fight, Eda tried to persuade her away from it, in fear of her last daughter getting hurt. But with Jackie's assurance, she was able to stay calm and approve of classes for her daughter. The Queen may have still presented a smile after this, but she would never move on or be the same again. In the following years, they would start to expand their kingdom. There were many other families that were growing, and so they were in need of more land. They would begin pushing east, expanding the walls and building homes. Eda loved exploring more outside the walls as they expanded. Unfortunately, while expanding, the humans would run into even more monsters, which Eda, while having ruled for many years, had not seen much of till now. As they pushed east, they ran into more and more monsters, and the Queen actually put to use some of her mother's spells while protecting her people. What Eda truly wanted was for their people to continue to live peacefully, but with the constant monster battles, it seemed like it might never come. But Eda wanted to believe that the monsters were like the ponyheads, that it was just her mother's fear of them that was keeping them separated, and that they were really kind themselves. So Eda made it her new mission to try and make peace with the monsters, even if they did present themselves quite scary. Eda tried to catch the attention of some monsters she saw, but whenever they saw her, they ran away, so she had a hard time trying to communicate peace with them. She decided it would have to wait until the next monster raid. But to her surprise, an opportunity did come in the end present itself. Eda would be on a midday stroll looking at nature when she heard someone crying. She walked up to where the noise was coming from and found a crying little red monster girl. She bent down and asked the girl if she was okay, to which the girl looked at her in surprise and fear. The Queen promised not to hurt her and said she just wanted to help, to which the girl calmed down. She said that she had fell down and hurt herself, and so now she couldn't walk and get back home. The Queen then said she'd be more than happy to help if the girl could just direct her. And so Eda carried the small monster girl back to her village, and Eda was amazed to see it. While rather swampy and dirty, it wasn't that far off from their own villages when she was much younger. Soon they reached the little girl's home, a wondrous tall tower. Eda was just setting the girl down when someone came yelling behind her, asking what she was doing with the chief's daughter. Eda then swirled around to see a two-headed lizard man, and then he saw her face. One of his heads went scared, and the other went angry. And he yelled, "Mumin Queen!" And soon all sorts of monsters were coming out of their homes and swarming around her. "Wait, I'm not here to fight. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to talk," she said to them. To which they didn't listen. They began shouting and throwing things at her, to which she did her best to avoid. She was about to get out her wand and use a defensive spell when someone else yelled loudly, "Stop!" The monsters all stopped and looked at one monster in silence, a clad man that looked similar to the little girl. Eda assumed perhaps they were related in either blood or species. He stepped forward and reiterated for the monsters to not attack the Queen, and to show her some respect, to which the other monsters grumbled. Eda wasn't sure what was going on, but with the newcomer silence, she reinstated her mission again, that she had come to speak to their monster leader. The clad monster smiled and said that that would be him, and would she please follow him this way. Once they were alone, he asked her what it was that she would wanted to say to him, to which she made her case. The monster raids were beginning to get out of hand, and she didn't want war or to hurt them. She just wanted to live peacefully. So was there anything she could do? He suggested that the humans just stop expanding, but she said that that wouldn't do. Her people needed homes. The monster thought for a moment, and then suggested they both think about it some more, and that she come back in a week for them to come to their right decision. Eda agreed and smiled, happy that she was on the right track. Eda would then walk back to her kingdom happily, and preached to her people that they would soon be at peace with the monsters. The people didn't believe it or want to, many of them saying that the monsters were evil and that it wasn't possible, but the queen continued to say otherwise. She always saw the best in people, and it would be her downfall. A week later, Eda left and went back to the monster town, but she would never return. The only information we have of what really went down is from a monster report, who wrote, Scourgeth, the chief of the Sideshifter clan and his monster village, had prepared a feast for when the Mumin queen arrived. Once she did arrive, the two would talk, both about peace and about their families. Upon the Mumin queen learning that the girl she had saved was the chief's daughter, she went more into detail about her own family and the pain of losing a child. The talk was quite wonderful, and soon it was time for the feast to begin. But before they did, Scourgeth offered the Mumin queen an apple, saying it was a funny joke that he just had to do. The queen accepted the apple, smiling at how well things were going. She then bit into it, and suddenly her heart stopped, and she fell to the ground and died. As she died, the monster chief would grumble that she should have never touched his daughter or the monster lands. He would then call his monsters out, and they would begin to feast on her body. The Mumins would worry for their queen, and Prince Consort Jackie took some men to instigate the monster town. And they were horrified when they saw the guts and blood everywhere, but Jackie even more so when he saw his wife's head sitting upon their table. The Mumins would initiate a fight. This is the event that would initiate the first great Mumin monster war. It was a miracle that Eda had decided to leave her wand at home, hoping it would make her seem less threatening. For if she hadn't, who knows what the monsters may have done with its power. Eda would be recorded as having been killed by the monsters in 78 BM at the age of 35. A queen who was so trusting, but she preached peacefulness to all, but when she tried to make it happen, her head ended up on a wall. And that was the biography of Eda, the Peacemaker, second Queen of Muni. And now for some fun facts about Eda. Eda is partially based on Snow White in several ways. One of them is being the poisoned apple. Her kissing plant thing is inspired by Steven Universe. Her golden hair and apple theme also have to do with golden apples from Minecraft. Her name means industrious. Her name and association with apples also comes from Edared apples, which are apples that have no one set color and are a mix of many types of apples. The name Eda is also similar to the name Eden, and Eda originally had a greater inspiration from Eve in the Garden of Eden. Her dress is inspired by German, some sort of German century fashion, and if the people of Muni had recorded records of the past queens, some of their original culturisms and customs, I think they would call Stella Eda's reincarnation, due to the many similarities in personality they shared. When I first designed Eda, say probably in 2018-19, she had brown hair and golden apple marks, and had more of a Swedish vibe. I then decided I wanted to change her hair to gold as well, and in reference to being born in the new era of magic. Then when making that change, I decided to also shorten her hair and give her more of a Snow White vibe. It's not really too important or expanded upon, but Eda being young and not being allowed to leave the walls is partially inspired by Anna from Frozen or Rapunzel from Tangled, and this concept from an anime called Haibe Renmei. I wrote that I didn't love the ending of her story, and I don't like that it maybe shows the monsters in a negative light, but I plan to write something sort of by the monsters' perspective of a lot of the Mumin War that should show that the monsters aren't awful people, and that they are just protecting their people and their land. And that was the biography of Eda and all of her fun facts. Thank you guys for listening in on this. Yay, we went over mainly 2 queen stories, and you got introduced to 2 more ancestors of Muni. And I think that's where we're gonna end it for today, guys. Thank you for listening in to this storytime reading. And I'll see you tomorrow with some more stories, but for a different fandom. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to leave them in the comments or message them on the Marshmallow app, which is also in the description. They can be questions relating to the Star-verse stories or anything, really. And thank you guys for being here. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more, please. And click the notification bell to get notified the next time we go live or a video comes out. I plan to turn this reading into some videos. So you will probably have a shortened version with less hesitating and stumbling. So thank you guys. I hope this one story wasn't too dark. I'll try to remember to give trigger warnings next time. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. Thank you guys for coming. Bye. See you guys next time you come. Tomorrow we'll be reading a Minecraft YouTube inspired story by one of my author friends who I'm not sure if they're still in the fandom, but they have given permission to read their story. It's kind of a superhero with like Minecraft characters as the characters, but it's fun. And I hope you guys, whoever decides to come, will enjoy it. And okay, see you guys next time. Bye.